that are to be paid by the ratepayers. This issue of what should be part of what is borne by the shareholders and what is borne by the ratepayers is a fundamental question about the nature of power bills in Nova Scotia. We know that what has happened as a result of the decision by the previous Progressive Conservative Party government in 1992 to privatize Nova Scotia Power is that that company has run profits in the order of $100 million every year since then. Now, with 20 years of experience, what that means is that's $2 billion that came out of the pockets of Nova Scotia ratepayers and went into the pockets of shareholders of Nova Scotia Power. That's an amazingly huge amount of money. And part of that, of course, is the pay that goes to the executives at fairly high levels in a privatized profit-making company, particularly one which is part of the reorganized Emira group of companies. And that profit-making model, which was chosen by the Progressive Conservative government in 1992, has directly led to the situation that ratepayers have found themselves in over the last 20 years and which we are having to grapple with right now. Loss of ownership by the public of a company like Nova Scotia Power does not mean that we lose control of the company, because the alternative to ownership is to look to regulatory controls. The company was always a regulated company, but the form of regulation, of course, becomes much more important when we deal with a privatized company, particularly one which is near monopoly. So the question of who, as between the shareholders and the ratepayers, bears responsibility for any particular item of expenditure that the company has to deal with is an important public policy question, and one that bears further examination here and at large. I don't accept that a survey conducted by one party will settle the matter. I think that this is part of a wider discussion of exactly what items do need to be borne by ratepayers and which one should be borne by shareholders. But it's certainly the case that ratepayers will want to scrutinize very carefully every item that comes in front of the UARB as part of the additional claimed burden leading to higher power rates, as we have seen in the large number of applications that have come forward over the last few years. In that context, of course, the consumer advocate and the small business advocates have done a good job of coming to grips with this issue. They have spoken up for large sectors of the ratepayers and attempted to call the company to account. Would it make sense to continue to to make this change on an ongoing basis? Well, in addition to the examples that we have seen of problematic high executive bonuses, we know, and previously cited to us, we know that this is a generalized problem. This is a generalized problem because at one time, even in large companies, the ratio of pay between the top executives and the line workers might be on the order of 1 to 10. That is, the executives would perhaps have salaries that might be 10 times the size of line workers. It has now grown to a ratio that tends to prevail of 50 to 1. So chief executives have in fact gained extensive ground compared to their line workers and, of course, to the general public. So this is something that bears looking at. Is this kind of legislation the only way to do it? Maybe. There may be others. It may be that taxation of salaries on a more progressive tax base is the way to go. There are alternatives. But I want to thank the party opposite for bringing this bill forward so that we now get the opportunity to begin to have this public discussion. Better late than never. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, and thank you to my exuberant colleagues in the back. Let me just say at the outset, this is obviously a measure that we would support, since for 2.5 years I've been raising this issue at the Utility and Review Board. And so it's something that's formed part of most of our submissions over those 2.5 years. It formed part of the bill that I introduced on the first day of the session, and I know that the Tories had mentioned this in the summer, I think, or early fall as well. But it's something that for a number of years I've been talking about in round tables around the province and so forth on energy issues. It was interesting. I only caught the end of the remarks by the member for Halifax-Chebucto, and it was interesting to hear him defend the Utility and Review Board, unfortunately not understanding or choosing to ignore the fact that the Utility and Review Board only addresses the issues which are set out in legislation to be considered. And that's why a bill like this becomes important, because if you say to the board will only, and the board has said this repeatedly in some of their decisions, they said that they will, whether it's the same with the demand side management fee, that they consider that. The board didn't arbitrarily decide to do that. They moved ahead with that because the legislation existed, and they consider it under the parameters of the legislation and the regulations which exist. And the same is true with power rates, that when the board looks at items, they look at items specifically as they are either covered by regulation or legislation through the provincial legislature. And so if the legislation says that executive bonuses shall not be considered as part of the rate that is paid by Nova Scotia Power ratepayers, then that's off the table. That's not considered. And in fact, it's interesting because this year, while there was a settlement referenced that removed it for 1 year, that was part of the settlement. Most of the folks I've talked to who work with people like the consumer advocate and so forth actually seem to suggest that the board actually couldn't have said that the bonuses, without that settlement and the agreement in Nova Scotia Power, the board actually couldn't have taken those bonuses out of the rate without that. That's not a decision that they were actually in a place and able to make on their own. And one of the reasons is when they look at salaries overall, they determine which part of each of the executive salaries is attributable to the rate base and which part of the executive salary is attributable to the shareholder or to the parent company or another party. And it would be mirrored in the same way. And so if they decided, for the sake of argument, that executive A had 80% of their salary was attributable to the rate base, well, that would apply to both the base salary and the bonus structure. And so there wouldn't have been, without legislation either such as this or such as what the Liberals have proposed, where it's also included, the Utility and Review Board is actually not left with the power or the possibility to completely take that out. And that's important. That's why this legislation or similar legislation becomes important. So that takes us to the next question, which is, should bonuses in the first place be part of the rate base? As the leader of the third party mentioned, the fact is that while Nova Scotia Power is a private company under the Emera brand, it is in fact a different company because it is a monopoly. And monopolies need to be treated in a different way. And that is no different than the fact that, when we saw telephone service in the country that was an effective monopoly under Bell a number of years ago, the pricing was largely regulated. A lot of the issues were regulated. When we saw cable prices, when there wasn't as much competition, it was much more heavily regulated. Nova Scotia Power is a monopoly, and so the regulatory burden on them, even though they're a private company, must be stronger, just as it was stronger when Bell was much more of a monopoly on a national basis for phone service. And so let's look at what it is that you get. You can get a bonus for it, Nova Scotia Power. And one of the examples I would use, and I know Rob Bennett hates it when everybody calls it this, but I guess it's come to be known as the Bennett Bunker, or their new headquarters down on the waterfront. And you can think that that was good financial sense to do the headquarters, or you can't. It was approved, and the Utility and Review Board reviewed it. But one of the things that the Utility and Review Board in their decision was they said, well, cost overruns shall be borne by the shareholder. So here's the price that you guys have come in and said this is going to cost. That can go to the rate base, but if there's a cost overrun, that will be borne by the shareholder. However, if you look at the bonus structure and the points that the president of Nova Scotia Power gets, one of the things that he was able to get a bonus for is whether that facility was constructed on time and on budget. Well, whether it was constructed on time or on budget has no benefit to ratepayers, because the Utility and Review Board had already reported and decided that ratepayers shouldn't be liable for any cost overruns. So in essence, Mr. Bennett was being potentially awarded a bonus on the basis of something which had no impact and no benefit to ratepayers. It would only affect shareholders. And so that's an example of a reason why the shareholders should pay the bonus and be responsible for the bonus cost, because most of the point structure, and for the record, he didn't get that portion of his bonus because it wasn't done on time, but most of the bonus structure for Nova Scotia Power executives is actually based on items which benefit shareholders, not the rate base. So we might have a slightly different discussion, arguably, if the bonus structure was based on a tier of things such as reliability, such as keeping the rate, such as not having a rate increase in a given year, such as managing performance at substations so that they don't go out, such as moving towards more undergrounding in areas where undergrounding makes financial and environmental sense. But those aren't the things that the Emera Board has determined that executives of Nova Scotia Power should get their bonuses for. The items that the Emera Board has decided that Nova Scotia Power executives should get their bonus for are all items which specifically benefit the shareholder. And so if you're going to do that, that is obviously well within the purview of the Emera Board to do that. They're a private company and more than welcome to do that. But on that basis alone, from my perspective, is a reason that the shareholders should thus take the burden of that payment of that bonus. Because the benchmarks are not there to benefit the ratepayer. The benchmarks are there to benefit Emera and the shareholders. Will this bill reduce power rates? No. Will this bill result, and I said this when we debated the bill that I brought forward that included this, but this is about bringing clarity and reducing the number of items that actually end up on the rate base and trying to control them in the best and most efficient possible way. When you're regulating, just like the regulations of cable companies and telephone companies have been reviewed over the years, it makes sense to review the regulation of a power monopoly in the province. And there are items which may have made sense a number of years ago. I wasn't here for the discussion around that, and I don't know, but they may very well have made sense at the time it was structured. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take the time and review the structure of the monopoly as time goes on. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't adjust things and change things. And frankly, this is one issue where even Nova Scotia Power, at least for this year, has been open and willing to make that consideration and make that concession. So, Madam Speaker, I'm certainly pleased to support this. As I say, it's included also in our bill, and I look forward to the rest of the debate on this and the other item today. Thank you very much.
I recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity today that we bring this bill forward. And I want to thank those previous speakers that have all spoke to this bill and offered their comments. I want to begin by assuring the honourable member from for Halifax-Shabukdo that there has been no apocalypse. This is not something new. If anyone's been paying attention to this particular member, he would know that I've been speaking about this for many years, and especially since being elected, speaking about the high cost of power rates, Madam Speaker, on more than one occasion, many occasions. So I do appreciate his comments and almost seems support for this particular bill. And it's important that we give this full consideration and full support to make things better for Nova Scotians. Now, we know in this particular bill that we talked about the executive bonuses. We know that they've been taken out for this particular year, but they're going to come back, Madam Speaker. We know that. We're going to have to go back and fight once again to have this removed. Now, it doesn't seem, as has been mentioned, it's about 5%, but that's 5% every year after that. So those numbers add up. As far as I'm concerned, Madam Speaker, the ratepayers deserve to save pennies if they can. It may not mean a lot when you divide it up and share that wealth with all ratepayers, but it does mean something. We need to find every way that we can possible to reduce what power rates are doing. Now, there's also some other things to consider in that. We realize that. We have to take into consideration the ability to conserve our electricity usage. Now, I don't know how many people are doing that. I know there's a lot of people when they, certainly these days, everything that you buy is said to be energy efficient. So when you're replacing your refrigerator or your stove or whatever it might be, washers and dryers and so on, Madam Speaker, there should be some savings. You should see that. But I know what it's like in my household, that I go around shutting lights off all the time, and you try to instill in my children that it's important to turn the lights off. I'd like to think that that does matter. I don't know how many people do that, but I would tend to think these days a lot of people are doing that. They're trying to conserve their amount of energy being used. I turn them off steady. I go behind them, shutting them off, because they don't see the value in it. As much as I harp about it, they don't pay the bills. And that's exactly right. I heard one of the honourable members from the other side speaking. They don't pay the bills. But what I want to say, it's important that they understand what it means to pay that bill, because one day, in the not-too-distant future, they're going to be paying these bills. And I sort of speak to the gallery this afternoon and these young adults that are here listening to this debate. You, too, will one day pay the power bill. It will mean something very much to you. What will it be when you have the opportunity to own your own home and pay those bills? We're trying to figure that out right now. We're trying to find ways to make that better so that it is a reasonable amount that can be afforded. Because the real stories today are that people are trying to decide whether they're going to pay their power bill or whether they're going to put food on the table for their families. That's the reality of today, and every member in this House, every member in this legislature knows that, Madam Speaker. A few from last night, here we are. Madam Speaker, it's important that I heard the honourable member from Halifax-Shabukdo say, well, 800, you know, that's not very meaningful. If you look at any of the polls that are done and that you put weight in and value in, an 800-person poll is not a bad poll. Generally speaking, if they do 1,000, that's considered a pretty large poll by way of sample. And this was from all over Nova Scotia that this was done. We heard the honourable member from Cumberland South speak to those results. 96% feel that executive bonuses and all of those treats that I call them that go to the big executives at Nova Scotia Power, the Mr. Bennett's of the world. The honourable member from Halifax-Shabukdo also spoke about the hundreds of millions of dollars, and I've been speaking about this for years. What work is being done in infrastructure? Nova Scotia Power will tell you all kinds, but you don't see it. You see $100 million, and there's been a couple of years, $125 million moved from one entity to the other. Where does that money go? That's gone into that shareholder's pocket. A lot of that money is going to pay out those great big executive bonuses. The salaries are one thing that we see the executives making, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in salary. And then on top of that, Nova Scotians, ratepayers, are expected to pay, and have been paying for years, millions of dollars over and above that out in bonuses. That's what they've been doing. Has that been right? No, that's not right at all. And as I've said, I've argued that for years. It doesn't matter to me who's in government. Something needs to be done about it. I hollered about it when the previous government was in power, and I was part of that team. I don't mind telling you, that's no shock to any of the members that were in the government benches in those days either. They knew my feelings on that. They will continue to know, as will the government of today and the government of tomorrow. They will all continue to know what this member thinks about the rising cost of power. Now, there are things that we need to look at. We talk about this being a monopoly. This is a very odd situation that we have in this province. We have the power, the energy source, only one nowadays, unfortunately. Some will tell you competition is a good thing. And if you look at other industries, competition does and has proven to be a very good thing for the consumer. It means they have options. It doesn't matter if it's cable, satellites, telephones, or what it is. Groceries. You have an option to buy your groceries at different stores, albeit nearly the same product, probably a lot of the same suppliers. That's fine. The consumer still has the option, Madam Speaker. We need the options. Those things need to be considered. But here we have a monopoly, a company, an independent private company that they'll claim that they are, but we have the UARB, who is an arm's length, or so we like to say, but it is very much controlled by the government. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That's clear. So the government is the one telling, and in my opinion, responsible now and has always been responsible for setting the rates. How is it that we have a private company? There's probably a lot of private companies in this province that would love to have the URB step in and say, oh, we're going to give you this much profit next year. Is that reasonable? I don't think so, Madam Speaker. I don't know why that's fair. And you'll hear us talk about the fairness in the next bill that we're going to speak to. But we need to look at this UARB and we need to make changes. It has to be changed. There's no question about that. Government has to have a say. We're saying bring that to this place. Let the members of this House have a say in whether we think that that's reasonable. Let the members of this House, let the government stand up and take responsibility for a body of government, the UARB, which is a body of government, who has said, in their words, that there is responsibility within the government benches to make decisions about power rates, to control energy issues. And there are many things that can be done. We hear about green energy. This party has always supported green energy. We put forward a bill that everybody supported unanimously in this House a few years back that the NDP has seen fit to change, to up the ante, to make that come quicker at a cost of, there's the question mark, Madam Speaker. Yes. We don't know what the cost is. We asked, you can ask whoever you want. They won't put it on the bills. They won't tell you what it is because, Madam Speaker, you know what? They don't know. It's a best guess scenario. That's a scary thought when we think about power issues into the future. Again, why the government needs to be more hands-on, in my opinion. Why they need to sit, why they need to look at the URB. What does the URB need to consider? Now, I've been to meetings and you hear the talk about rate requirements. Now, every company has a rate requirement. And in the rate requirement, they think about profits. Well, what's more important, profits or people putting food on the table, Madam Speaker? That's a question I have today. What's more important? That's what this bill is about. I think that there's an opportunity. This is a good bill. I've heard people talk in favor of it. The Honourable Member for Halifax-Sherbrooke, in my opinion, talked in favor of this bill, talked how more discussion is required. I agree with that, and I thank him for those comments. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East talked about this bill, one that they could support. He's put a similar bill forward in this very session about how to make life better for Nova Scotians on power rates. This is a bill that I believe government should take hold of. Toss it across the hall to law amendments. Let Nova Scotians come in. Let those 800 surveys mean something. But let the public come in. And I'll bet you that there would be plenty of people that would come into this House, into that red chamber, and they would talk about what the increasing cost of power rates in the province of Nova Scotia means to them, Madam Speaker. I would like to see this House support this bill in the fashion that it is currently in, and certainly open to any amendments if we can make life better for Nova Scotians. Bring it back. If they feel that they've got to put their own bill in, put their own bill in. It's not about any individual as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't have to be my bill. Be great if it was. Doesn't have to be. Let them put a bill forward. Let's make life better for Nova Scotians. They were the party that campaigned and said, making life better for Nova Scotians. That was the campaign slogan, Madam Speaker, that was on every piece of material that went out. And I know that you know that, Madam Speaker. I know that you know that. If they are, in fact, want to hold true to that commitment, or is that a promise? I'm not sure. They would claim commitment, not promise, I guess, today. At least what we've heard this week, there's a difference in the word commitment and promise. But if they are committed to Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker, let them be committed. Put a bill on the floor, or take this very bill. This is a good bill. We've heard that discussion this morning. This is a good bill. Send it to law amendments. Let the people in Nova Scotia decide whether they want to have an impact on this or not, whether they think there's value in it. And with those few words, Madam Speaker, and I see that my time has expired, thank you very much.
Recognize the House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Can you call Bill number 70, the Ratepayer Fairness Act?
I now call Bill number 70, the Ratepayers Fairness Act. I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What is the basis for a fair rate of return for Nova Scotia Power? That's what we're trying to get at with this bill, Bill number 70, an act to amend Chapter 380 of the revised statutes to the Public Utilities Act respecting ratepayer fairness. So what is the basis for a fair rate of return for Nova Scotia Power, keeping in mind that it must also be fair to ratepayers, to the Nova Scotians who are paying for their electricity? This bill empowers the Utility and Review Board, who are our police agent, our policing agent for the people with respect to Nova Scotia Power. It empowers the UARB to compare rates of profit to other Canadian utilities. It empowers them to ensure that the rate of return that we must pay to Nova Scotia Power over and above the cost to produce electricity is based on the risk-free rate of return, recognizing that shareholders of Nova Scotia Power, the investors in Nova Scotia Power, do deserve to make something more than that risk-free rate of return, because yes, they are accepting some risk when they invest in Nova Scotia Power. It's not as safe as investing in a risk-free government bond. We also want to ensure that the rate of return for Nova Scotia Power recognizes that their company, that their business holds much less risk than other types of investment that are available to people who are investing in companies in common stock. So, Madam Speaker, we recognize, you know, they have to make certainly at least the risk-free rate of return, but perhaps they should not be able to make the same kinds of return that might be found in other forms of common stock. Why? Well, because Nova Scotia Power is a virtual monopoly. And they are operating their business in an economy in Nova Scotia which is very non-cyclical. We don't have a cyclical economy here. We have a large portion of our workforce employed by government. It's backed by the tax base of the province. We don't have an oil and gas industry here that's cyclical, that business activity moves up and down with the price of oil. We don't have that here. We don't have a big manufacturing sector like they would have in Ontario with auto manufacturing. So we're less, and Nova Scotia Power is less subject to the ebbs and flows of the economy. It's safer for them. We must also recognize that Nova Scotia Power has plenty of demand for the current power they produce. In fact, there are times when large industrial users, like Michelin for instance, have been faced with shutdowns because everybody in the province is using up every ounce, if I'm going to use that term, it's not a electrical term, but every ounce of power that's being produced, every kilowatt of power that's being produced. So there's plenty of demand for the power they're producing. They also have an ability to export power through the grid. So if all the power is not being used in the province at any point in time, it can be exported out down into the United States through the electricity grid. And we must also recognize that Nova Scotia Power is operating in a part of the world, despite this NDP government, figured might get some raised heads there, we're in a very stable social political environment here. And there's some catching on, Madam Speaker. They're a little slow to catch on there. It's a little jab. All in good fun. So, Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia Power, you know, it has a lot of stability in its business model and has a lot of surety for its shareholders to give them confidence that they're going to be able to generate returns on their investment. So this bill, we also want to take into account that Nova Scotia Power should have a separate fuel adjustment mechanism. Essentially what this means is right now, Nova Scotia Power shareholders don't accept any of the risk of cost increases for their inputs to generate electricity. Most businesses, business owners, and if they're shareholders in the business, have to accept the risk that if the cost of their inputs rise, their profitability may decrease because they may have to absorb those costs to still be able to put a product or service onto the marketplace that's affordable for people. Well, Nova Scotia Power doesn't have that risk. whenever cost inputs like coal or wind energy, whatever the cost input happens to be to generate the electricity, whenever those costs rise, Nova Scotia Power simply passes that on to the consumer, to Nova Scotians. So there's no risk in that for Nova Scotia Power. So, Madam Speaker, I'm hopeful that the government and that the members of the Liberal caucus will be supportive of this legislation that we've put forward here today, because I think it recognizes the need, as is in the title, the need for fairness for ratepayers. So, perhaps most importantly, this bill requires the Utility and Review Board to complete its analysis of what rate of profit Nova Scotia Power should be permitted to earn, independent, based on information that's independent of Nova Scotia Power stakeholders. You know, in fairness, the information that's going to be put forward by Nova Scotia Power's stakeholders is probably going to be favorable to Nova Scotia Power. So the Utility and Review Board should base its decisions not on that information, but on its own independent information. Now, we've just spoken, members have spoken about the need for, it wasn't today, but we had 3 significant bills related to power rates in this sitting of the legislature. One of them had to do with transparency in power rates. And in conjunction with this, in determining what profit is allowable for Nova Scotia Power, we must also be mindful of the need to have transparency in power rates. For instance, Nova Scotians should know how much of their power rate increases are caused by government energy policy. Now, Nova Scotia Power has told us recently, the member from Hants West discovered by asking Nova Scotia Power in meetings that were open to the public, you know, what is the most recent, what portion of government energy policy accounts for recent rate increases? Nova Scotia Power said 25%. So, what is wrong with Nova Scotians knowing what is behind energy rate increases? Nova Scotians are paying for power rates, they're paying their power bills. They deserve to know what goes into the costs that they're paying. So, Madam Speaker, you know, I would say show us the numbers. If the government believes that they are doing the right thing by moving towards 40% renewables by 2020, and if it will make power rates cheaper for Nova Scotians, show us the numbers. Then we could debate it. And you know what, maybe there wouldn't have to be any debate. But we will never know as long as the government is too scared to table that information and keeps it secret from Nova Scotians. So, and I know, Madam Speaker, that we've heard comments from the Premier today saying that, you know, the past Conservative government failed to recognize the necessity of getting off of fossil fuels. Well, why not show us the numbers that prove that? That prove that government should have been getting away from fossil fuels. And he often talks about the province being shackled to the international fossil fuel markets. But, Madam Speaker, you know, I've offered the numbers, I've offered somebody to counter the numbers, but, you know, when Nova Scotia Power is costing only 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour to produce a unit of electricity through means of coal-generated electricity, and it's paying 15 cents per kilowatt hour to generate electricity from wind, the business case isn't there. So these are important decisions, and it's not good enough for the government to just say, well, we don't need to show the people of Nova Scotia the numbers, we'll just keep them secret. If they're so confident that these are the right decisions that they're making, they should show us the numbers. So, you know, I don't want to run out of time without wrapping up this properly. But, you know, Nova Scotians deserve to have fairness in the rates that they're paying because it's a significant cost for Nova Scotians. If you look at the monthly budget, and I don't know if any of our young people are visiting with us today have ever looked at a monthly budget for a family, but you might be interested to go home and check with your, at home, with your parents about how much you're paying and how much your families are paying for electricity usage. It's a significant component of the monthly expenditure in your household. So to close, Madam Speaker, you know, we believe that both other parties in the legislature should take a good look at this bill and look at advancing it through to law amendments, through third reading, and to passing the bill, because we believe that it will bring greater fairness for Nova Scotian ratepayers. Thank you.
Before I recognize the next member, I'd just like to remind all members that it's not an acceptable practice to speak to visitors in the gallery. We do hope that they will enjoy their experience here, but all debate should be directed to the chair. Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it certainly gives me pleasure to rise today and speak to Bill number 70, an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act, respecting ratepayer fairness. And you know, Madam Speaker, it's interesting that the opposition Conservative Party brings forward this bill because, as my colleague from Halifax, Shabukto, already mentioned earlier in the previous bill, is you know, this is the party that brings this bill forward is the party that actually put these measures in place when they were in government in the 90s. So. The bill proposes, Madam Speaker, that directing the Utilities and Review Board on what to consider and not to consider in deliberating on any future increases in return on equity of Nova Scotia Power. They bring these amendments forward, but you know, Madam Speaker, this is a party who has had us, as the member opposite did mention, has had Nova Scotia shackled to the international rates of coal over the past 20-25 years, actually probably right from the beginning of coal generation plants in the province. Now, Madam Speaker, I know that when I talk to people in my constituency, people say to me that, no question, nobody likes the increase on power rates. Absolutely not. And that's what we recognize. And that's why we brought forward a plan during the last election to remove the provincial portion of the HST off of electricity and home energy. So, Madam Speaker, when we hear about these increases, and again, we don't like to see increases in power rates, but at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, what we've seen is an 8% decrease in power rates because of the move of this government. So, which puts money back into the pockets of low-income, median income, and even high-income earners in this province, Madam Speaker. So, our, fairness in this bill is to ensure that we have a future that gets us off of coal-powered plants. This and oil. And this is something that allows Nova Scotia as a province to move forward. The province of Nova Scotia and the province of Newfoundland and Labrador entered into an agreement on the Lower Churchill project. Now, this is just one piece of the overall puzzle for this province to move in the right direction, to ensure that we do have power rates that remain stable in the long term. And once that power is up and running, we know that the power rates will remain stable for a 30-year agreement. That's good for business. That's good for individual homeowners. That's good for family budgets. And we know that. And I don't understand why the Conservative Party is against that. They don't understand that stable energy prices will be good for the economy. So when we read a plan like the renewable electricity plan that was put forward just a couple of months ago, this will allow Nova Scotia to get off of fossil fuels, which have been going up time and time again over the past number of years, and that is not good for Nova Scotians. So that's why this government has moved forward with this plan of fairness, moving forward a plan that will get us off of what we know today as international markets on electricity, which we know is not a positive thing. We know, Madam Speaker, that coal has increased over the past number of years. Over the last 6 years by 75%. That is a huge increase in power, and we know that we know on this side of the House that we need to get off of that. We know that we need to get off of that. And so, Madam Speaker, I know the opposition might need some pictures to see this, because maybe they can't read the electricity plan. So I do want to table the trend on coal prices over the last 6 years. Is from 2004 to 2011. And this graph, a lovely picture as it is, we know that coal energy prices have gone up by 75%. So I'd like to table that, Madam Speaker. The party opposite, and you know, it's the other interesting thing, Madam Speaker, is the Conservative Party. Their federal cousins are the ones that actually reneged on Kyoto this past week, right? And so, Madam Speaker, we see that, and we know that Conservatives don't necessarily believe in climate change. We know that. That is a fact. But we know that this government is moving forward with our targets, which have been proven to be the most progressive and positive move forward right across the country and, in fact, around the world, Madam Speaker. So, but the party opposite would have Nova Scotians believe that the issues are the structure of the Utilities and Review Board or the ratepayer portion of performance bonuses paid to Nova Scotia Power executives. It's not. That stuff is just pocket change, Madam Speaker. The Conservatives are also suggesting that there is some shroud secrecy around this, some sort of secrecy around NSPI. And we know that the URB at any time can go in and look at Nova Scotia Power and their books. We know that the rate increases that we've seen in ratepayers over the last 10 years of inaction by the Conservative government and, of course, the inaction of the Liberal government in the 90s has resulted in these high increases. And that is unfair, just like the bill suggests, that it's unfair to Nova Scotians to be shackled to that sort of increases. And so we're moving forward to ensure that we have a future here, that we ensure that we have a 30-year agreement with the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in regards to the Muskrat Falls initiative. But we also know, Madam Speaker, that we have ensured across Nova Scotia, we have wind power going up. We have a plant here, in fact, in Nova Scotia that is building windmills, putting good-paying Nova Scotians back to work, because the Conservative government didn't do anything to ensure that Trenton Works stayed open for the people of Pictou County. And the Liberal Party put out a news release of, they said that they didn't agree with that because people in Pictou County are going back to work. This is good. That's good news for the people of Pictou County. Good quality green jobs for the future of Nova Scotia. We're building those things here. We also know that the province is moving forward with tidal energy. We know that the amount of energy that can be created out of the Bay of Fundy is huge. More energy, more tides coming into the Bay of Fundy that is more than all of the water in the world put together. All the rivers in the world. And so, Madam Speaker, that is something that is so positive. So we're talking about wind energy, we're talking about tidal power, we're talking about the Muskrat Falls deal, we also talk about biomass. Now, of course, with biomass, we need to move cautiously with that. But, Madam Speaker, those are the types of things that Nova Scotians want to see happen. They want to see a government that's moving forward with those sort of innovative ideas to get us off of the coal and the oil that has been decades that was under those two parties that they didn't do anything about. Not a target, not a plan. We have the plan to move forward to get us off of this. And so, Madam Speaker, I know that the opposition doesn't like to hear it. I know they don't like to hear it, but it's true. They don't like to hear the fact that by 2020, Nova Scotia will have 40% of its energy from renewable sources. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, that is a record that I'm proud to stand on and to talk to the young people here in the gallery today. Thank you very much.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is an issue, obviously, that there's very much to say on. I usually don't like to read from notes, but it's very easy to get distracted on an issue that is very quickly becoming the #1 issue in our province. Because we're looking come January 1st at a 10% increase. Over the next 3 years, another 20% increase. And if we think we've seen job losses in rural Nova Scotia, you know, we've just begun. Because companies are finding that, that if electricity is a significant part of their business, then we know that they're going to be making decisions around that kind of cost input. In just 9 years, Madam Chair, we know, Madam Speaker, we know that power has increased by 36%. And we're asking ordinary Nova Scotians to dig deeper and deeper into their pockets to cover areas that Nova Scotians find very, very difficult to fathom. And the ordinary ones that I hear about, Madam Speaker, are obviously that investors are guaranteed, you know, 9.2, 9.3%. And when Nova Scotia Power, you know, started and became the private monopoly in this province, you know, investors may have been somewhat tentative about how the company would do, and a guarantee may have made, you know, good sense to get people to invest in the company. But when we take a look at the realities over the last decade, you know, utilities across North America don't give their investors 9.2% guarantee. And that's an area that absolutely we have to address. And our party believes in capping, you know, the rate of return.
Order, please. There's been a request for an introduction. If the member would be so kind to allow that. Thank you very much. I now recognize the honourable member for Truro Bible Hill on an introduction.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I would like to address our attention to the gallery above today. We have a class from Truro, Nova Scotia, and in fact, the teacher here, Mr. Peter Keaveney, is well known to my family. I was married to his brother, Dennis, and we are still very, very good friends, and I love this family. So welcome, children, to the gallery today, and welcome, Mr. Peter Keaveney. Thank you.
Thank you. We welcome all visitors to the gallery today. I recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
So earlier this month, we learned that Nova Scotians will pay at least 6.1% more in the new year to light and heat their homes. But of course, we all know that was just part of the equation. There'll be 3.2% fuel adjustment mechanism, as the member opposite talked about the high price, the high cost of coal to this province. And there's one guarantee. There is one guarantee, Madam Speaker, that Nova Scotians can be assured of. And as long as those two plants can get up and run each morning, Nova Scotia Power has no intention to decommission them. We will be using coal in this province for a long, long time. And many see them at just half-life. And we know that the world is changing very quickly. There are major companies now that will not buy products that are made with dirty energy. I think it's in our best interest, you know, to move perhaps even quicker in that regard. So we have the fuel adjustment mechanism, which is coming at us. Plus, we have the NDP electricity tax. And while nobody minds, you know, paying to see greater efficiency, I'm not sure we've seen that accounting in this province whatsoever. And I think, again, this is why we keep asking for a comprehensive audit of Nova Scotia Power. And it's interesting now, we're starting to hear that theme a little bit more from companies. And even Bowater talked about this openly, that, you know, Nova Scotia Power does need that kind of internal audit to see where, in fact, dollars can be saved. And if, you know, if the NDP government is asking hospitals and school boards and that public areas make sure you're doing things cost effective, why not bring forth legislation to say to Nova Scotia Power, we want to see the results of an internal audit that will return sense to Nova Scotia families. One of the areas that I think we need to take a look at, and that was through a bill that we brought forward, which was the Ratepayers Protection Act. And this was considered, again, a small step for homeowners and businesses, because we need to point out that Nova Scotians and the province's business community are being pushed to the brink by already sky-high power rates, and they aren't able to withstand future electricity increases being sought by Nova Scotia Power. And we know that while a portion of the HST did come off our electricity bills, small business did not benefit. And in some ways now, what's happened again, Bowater and NewPage, they've been paying that all along as well. So it was no benefit to them. The NDP keeps talking about the HST removal as a solution, and we all know that that it's really becoming somewhat of a moot point because of the other areas that have been increased on our electricity bills, and we're likely to see more of that. Power rates, as I said, have increased 36% over the last 10 years, and now Nova Scotia Power will seek another 20% over the next 3 years. These increases stretch budgets, put a strain on pocketbooks, make doing business in Nova Scotia unaffordable. The last 10 years brought a series of Conservative NDP governments that didn't stand up to Nova Scotia Power. And I think that's the area now that Nova Scotians are asking us to take a look at. Why should $100 million leave Nova Scotia and go to, you know, corporate Emera and receive little or no benefits to Nova Scotia? Over the last 10 years, $100 million a year have moved out of this province with no benefits to Nova Scotia. Both the Conservatives and the NDPs had a chance to put an end to the Nova Scotia Power bonuses, but both have failed to do so. The NDP want you to believe they care about the pain Nova Scotians are in, and the Conservatives want you to believe they care by proposing legislation based on principles that we've been talking about for 2 years, such as ending ratepayer-funded bonuses and suggesting costs of renewable energy legislation should be outlined at the time of bill introduction, when they didn't even do that themselves while in government. Our work begins with Nova Scotians knowing whether they're getting value for money, whether the parent company Emera is simply bleeding Nova Scotia Power dry. With Nova Scotians staring down the barrel of a 7th power rate hike in 10 years, we have repeatedly asked government to order a performance and value audit of Nova Scotia Power and their operations. And, you know, the face of past Nova Scotia Power increases and currently what's coming at us, you know, this is what I'm sure every MLA in this House, none of us are immune to those phone calls, to those visits to our office when the power has been shut off or will be shut off. And in fact, it was just yesterday I had an email from a constituent who said that as he takes a look at the new power increase, and he's a member of our Canadian Forces, he said, I can no longer afford to live in this province. I went to my boss today and said, can I have a transfer? Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I want to say what a pleasure it is for me to get up and speak on Bill 70 that was introduced by my colleague from Hants West. It's very interesting. I was listening to the member from the government speak about targets. And you know that we've had time and time again in this House a minister stand up and said that this government doesn't have targets. And yet we had the courage of the young, we don't have targets. We don't do targets. Now, Madam Speaker, it's very important that we talk about this issue. And the poor member back there got some bad research because he said very clearly that we have been hostage to expensive imported coal for 25 years, shackled by it. The reality is, Madam Speaker, that the coal was produced here in this province and still is. But up until 2002, the Cape Breton Development Corporation was the main supplier of coal for the generation of power in this province. Not 25 years ago, as he would have us think that was shackled to. The other thing that's important to know, Madam Speaker, is today, right today. You had yours. Today, Madam Speaker, today, you know what? I hope that the member will give us some time to actually address all the issues that he gave misinformation on. Because Madam Speaker, and I probably don't have enough time for that because there's been a lot of misinformation. But the reality is today, there's still coal being produced in Stellarton and Pictou County, and there's still coal being produced in Cape Breton County that supplies Nova Scotia Power. Now I hear the Minister of Justice saying shame. Well, his own Department of Energy and his government will tell you that regardless of what we do, and by the way, I want you to know that I am in favor of green energy. I have no problem with green energy. But the reality is that minister will be so upset the day he gets up and he can't turn on his light and shave his mustache or whatever he does. The reality is, the Department of Energy will tell you, with all their plans, with all their green plans, Madam Speaker, with all their green plans, in 10 years' time, this province will still be 35% reliant on coal-fired generation. 35%. That's from the Department of Energy. That's from that government's own department. Now, we all know that when government is involved, it's very hard for them to meet targets. But then again, I'm happy to hear at least they have a target because normally we hear they don't. But the reality is we're going to have to produce coal. So the one thing that the member did say that I have some agreement with is the expensive imported coal. We should not have to import coal when we have a resource here in this province. We just have to think about the fact that the coal is here. We need jobs because we know the poor job this government has done on keeping employment numbers up. So we need jobs here. And we have an opportunity to supply those jobs in Cape Breton, in a mine that's going to produce coal that will produce 300 jobs plus the spin-offs. And Madam Chair, the quality of the coal is much better than the quality of the coal that they're importing. It's anywhere from 15 to 2,500 BTUs higher, which would mean that you would be by using that coal, you could probably use about 75% of the amount that's now being burned and get the same amount of energy out of it. The other thing it means is that you would be dealing with a Nova Scotian company dealing in Canadian dollars instead of American dollars, which is what they're using today on the very expensive international market. And the third thing, and the real bonus here is Nova Scotians would be put back to work. They would be 300 more people paying good taxes. There would be property taxes being paid by this mine for our communities. And in the long run, we would benefit. Now, the other thing that this failed to be mentioned by the member from the government side of the House, was indeed that coal technology has improved immensely. Clean coal technology is on the cutting edge, and more areas are using coal because of using the clean coal technology. As a matter of fact, in the United States, a number of the states have now gone back to coal because it's a reasonable supply and it's an internal supply. You're not reliant on some foreign-based supply of a resource to give you the energy that you need to operate your province and or your country. So these things are things that we need to keep in mind. The job creation is very important. Now, I mentioned that the Department of Energy said that 10 years down the road, we're still going to be on coal. Nova Scotia Power, in all their rate hearings and all the times that they've gone forward and said, we need to look at a price increase. But they'll still tell you that they are going to need to have coal in their operations for the next 10 to 25 years. Now, what really is interesting, because the member on the opposite side of the House provided us with a chart because he wasn't sure if we understood the numbers that he was quoting. And he's right, I didn't understand them because they weren't factual. But the chart says that coal has gone up in price, and he's right. That's the one thing he did get right. It's gone up by 76%, you said. So, here's the interesting thing that he didn't tell you, Madam Speaker. The thing that he didn't tell you, that wind energy, even at the increased cost of coal energy and what it costs to supply a kilowatt of power, wind energy, Madam Speaker, is still two-thirds the cost higher than coal energy. That's the thing you never bothered to bring forward, but that's okay, because you didn't know.
Order, please. Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Yeah, but it was quick. But there's another reality that hasn't been mentioned in this House. Even though there are alternate sources of energy, alternate sources that we need to promote, there is no question about that. But we also have to note that they come with a cost. The biggest thing that I'm really concerned about is the fact that they don't understand how important it would be to create some jobs here in Cape Breton and help stabilize our power price. These jobs might be located in Cape Breton, but it would be jobs that would be there for all Nova Scotians. And the other thing that would do, Madam Chair, is it would have an effect on families because they wouldn't be going out west. They wouldn't have to leave their children and their families behind. So there would be a marked improvement for them. So when the member opposite says we are shackled by expensive coal, imported coal, it's obvious that he doesn't understand how it worked. And you know what? I want to point out to him that Donkin is on Cape Breton Island. It's a place where you can get lots of coal. It's not, I know that some people on the mainland think that we're another country in Cape Breton. But we are not. We are part of Nova Scotia. As a matter of fact, we were where Nova Scotia started, and I think you people here in Halifax sometimes need to take that into account. But for him to say that we're shackled by expensive coal imported from other areas is not correct. It is not correct. The coal came from Cape Breton, and Cape Breton is a big part of this province. Now, it is a shame that he doesn't understand that. It's a real shame, because normally he's a pretty good guy. So let's just recap where we're at. We have a Department of Energy run by that government which says that we have to have, in 10 years, move to green energy. Not a problem. It says in 10 years' time that 35% of the needs of energy in this province will be produced by coal.
We have 1 minute remaining. It's becoming difficult to hear the member. I'd ask that the members either take their conversations outside the chamber or keep it down a little bit longer. for just a few more minutes. The honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Very much for that wise ruling, Madam Speaker. I take exception to the member saying that it's story time because it's the only Department of Energy that says 35% of the needs of this province, the whole province, Cape Breton Island included. Well, again, he's over there rambling on about private funding. We still are going to need coal. This man and you and the government should understand that coal is going to be part of it. It should be Nova Scotian coal. Thank you very much.
Recognize the House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thought we had a pretty good debate there, and knowing that some members maybe like to get down to the State of the Province address, that concludes the business from the PC caucus today, so I will pass off the reins to the Government House Leader.
Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the House Leader of the Conservative Party. Madam Chair, wish the House to now rise to meet from the hours of noon to midnight tomorrow. And we will go bills for third reading, Bills 72, 81, 86, 93, 94, 95, 98, 104, 108, 111, 112, private local bills 129 and 132, Committee of the Whole 55, 90, 96, 100, 102, 106, 109, 110, 114, 115, 116, 118, 121, 122, 123, 124, 125, and time permitting, bills for second reading, Bills 126, 128, 131, and 133. I wish we to now rise now, Madam Speaker, to meet from the hours of 12 noon to midnight. Thank you.
The motion is that we do now rise to meet again tomorrow, December the 8th, between the hours of noon to midnight. All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We stand adjourned.